You know that feeling when you finally decide to get your financial life together and you Google how to build wealth and you get hit with like 47 different opinions? Invest first. No wait. Pay off debt first. Emergency fund? Index funds? Real estate? Crypto? It's honestly overwhelming, and I get why most people just, give up before they even start. Picture this. You've got your first real paycheck coming in. Maybe you're 25, maybe you're 35, doesn't matter. You know you should be doing something with your money besides just letting it sit there. But every financial guru on the internet is screaming different advice at you. One says emergency funds are for suckers. Another says investing without an emergency fund is financial suicide. Who do you trust? My name is Andy, and I spend way too much time thinking about money and the psychology behind wealth building. And here's what I've learned after diving deep into the research. There actually is a correct order to build wealth, not because I said so, but because the math and behavioral psychology back it up. Most people aren't failing because they picked the wrong strategy. They're failing because they picked the right strategies in the wrong order. So in this video, we are going to go through what I believe is the correct order to build wealth with your money. Think of it like a ladder. Every rung you step on makes the next move easier instead of harder. If you climb this out of order, you feel like you are sprinting on a treadmill. If you climb it in the right order, your money starts acting like a team that is actually working for you. By the end, you will know exactly what to focus on first, second, third, so you are not guessing every time a dollar hits your account. First, let us talk about the default mode that most people live in. You get paid, your money comes in, and it immediately explodes into random directions. A little to rent, a little to debt, a little to fun. By the time you try to be responsible and save, there is nothing left. Then you tell yourself a story that you are just bad with money, or that you need to make double your income. Here is the mindset shift that changes everything. Building wealth is not one big decision. It is a series of tiny decisions done in the right order. If you imagine trying to build a house, you would not start by hanging the art on the wall before you pour the foundation. But that is exactly how most people treat their finances. They are decorating the house while the ground underneath is still mud. No wonder every little emergency feels like the whole thing is about to collapse. Once you lock in the correct order, every dollar you earn has a clear mission that supports the next mission. It starts to feel like a system instead of chaos. So let us start at the very bottom, level 1. Level 1 is not investing. It is not even paying off all your debt. Level 1 is getting out of what I call money chaos. Money chaos is when you have no idea what is coming in, where it is going, and you have zero safety net. The first move here is boring but powerful. You track your money for 1 month, even if it is messy, just to see reality. Then, your only goal is to create the tiniest gap between what comes in and what goes out. Even $50 a month is a start. With that gap, you build your first mini emergency buffer, something like $500 or $1,000 tucked in a boring savings account. Is that going to make you rich? No. But it changes everything emotionally, because now every flat tire or surprise bill is not a financial crisis. Once you have that small buffer, we move to level 2, which is where you attack toxic high-interest debt. This is credit card balances, store cards, payday loans, anything with a soul-crushing interest rate. If you are paying 20% interest on a balance, that is like having a negative investment that is guaranteed. If you owe $5,000 on a card at around 20%, the bank is quietly charging you about $1,000 a year just for existing. That is money that could have been building your future. But here's the psychological win. Every dollar you put toward debt gives you an immediate guaranteed return equal to the interest rate. Pay off a credit card at 24% interest? That's a guaranteed 24% return. Show me an investment that can guarantee that. I'll wait. The average American household with credit card debt owes $6,194. At minimum payments, that will take them 30 years to pay off, cost them over $11,000 in interest. 30 years. Think about that. But if they focused and attacked it aggressively, they could knock it out in 18 to 24 months. Quick pause. If this systematic approach is making sense to you, hit subscribe and like this video. It really helps me keep creating this kind of deep dive content. Plus, there's a lot more to cover, and you'll want to see how all these steps connect. Alright, so once you've got your basic emergency buffer and you've eliminated high-interest debt, now we move to step 3. Building your full emergency fund. This is 3 to 6 months of expenses, sitting in a boring savings account, earning maybe 4% to 5%. If you shop around for a high-yield account, I know. Emergency funds feel like money just sitting there doing nothing. But here's what they're actually doing. They're buying you freedom. Freedom from financial anxiety. Freedom to take calculated risks. Freedom to leave a job you hate. Freedom to invest aggressively because you know you won't need to sell your investments during a crisis. The psychology here is huge. When you don't have an emergency fund, every financial decision becomes a high-stakes gamble. Got money to invest? Well, what if your car breaks down next week? Better keep it in checking, just in case. But when you have that emergency fund locked and loaded, suddenly you can invest with confidence. How much should you save? Well, if your monthly expenses are $3,000, you want $9,000 to $18,000 sitting in that emergency fund. Sounds like a lot. It is. But consider this. The average unemployment duration in the US is about 14 weeks. 14 weeks. If you lose your job, that emergency fund isn't just helpful, it's survival. Now step 4 is where things get interesting. Maximizing any employer 401k match. This is literally free money. And it's mind-blowing how many people leave it on the table. If your employer matches 50 cents for every dollar, you contribute up to 6% of your salary and you're making $50,000. That's $1,500 in free money annually. $1,500 for doing nothing except contributing to your own retirement. Yet 23% of employees don't contribute enough to get the full match. That's like finding $1,500 on the sidewalk and just walking past it. The return on investment here is an instantaneous 50% to 100%, depending on your employer's match formula. No stock, no bond, no cryptocurrency can guarantee that. Here's the key. Contribute just enough to get the full match, no more yet. We'll come back to retirement contributions later, but right now we're still building our foundation. Step 5. This is where most people mess up. They want to jump straight to investing, but there's one more foundation piece: paying off moderate interest debt. I'm talking about car loans, student loans, anything in that 4% to 7% range. Now, this is where it gets a little fuzzy, and honestly, there's room for debate here. If you've got student loans at 4%, you could make an argument for investing instead, since historical market returns are higher. But here's why I still recommend paying these off first: certainty and simplicity. When you pay off a 5% loan, you get a guaranteed 5% return. When you invest in the market, you might get 8%, you might get negative 20%. Plus, debt payments complicate your cash flow. The fewer monthly payments you have, the more flexibility you have to invest aggressively. Think of it this way. Every debt payment you eliminate is like giving yourself a permanent raise. If your car payment is $400 a month and you pay off the car, you just gave yourself $4,800 annually in extra cash flow. That's money you can now invest every year for the next decade. The psychological benefit is massive too. Debt creates stress, even low-interest debt. And stress makes us make bad financial decisions. When you're completely debt-free except for your mortgage, you sleep better, you think clearer, you take smarter risks. All right, step 6. Now we can start investing aggressively. First stop, maxing out tax-advantaged accounts. For 2025, that means $7,000 in an IRA and $23,500 in a 401k if you're under 50. If you're over 50, you get catch-up contribution, $8,000 in an IRA and $31,000 in a 401k. Why these accounts first? Taxes. The government is essentially giving you a discount on your investments through tax deductions or tax-free growth. A traditional IRA gives you an immediate tax deduction. A Roth IRA gives you tax-free growth forever. Either way, you come out ahead compared to taxable investing. Let's do some quick math. If you're in the 22% tax bracket and you contribute $7,000 to a traditional IRA, You save $1,540 in taxes immediately. That's like getting a 22% instant return before your investments even start growing. But here's where people get overwhelmed. They think they need to become Warren Buffett overnight. They start researching individual stocks, following financial Twitter, buying whatever's trending. Big mistake. For most people, investing should be boring. Total stock market index funds, maybe some international exposure, set it and forget it. The data backs this up. Over the past 20 years, the average investor returned 2.9% annually, while the S&P 500 returned 8.2%. Why the difference? Because people keep messing with their investments. They buy high when they're excited, sell low when they're scared. Index funds remove the temptation to tinker. Step 7. Once you've maxed out those tax-advantaged accounts, now you can consider taxable investing. This is where you might explore individual stocks, sector ETFs, maybe even some alternative investments if you really know what you're doing. But honestly, for most people, more index funds in a taxable account works perfectly fine. The beauty is that now you have maximum flexibility. Need money for a house down payment in a few years? You can access these funds without penalties. Want to retire early? This money isn't locked away until age 59 and a half. Step 8, and this is where the wealthy really separate themselves: real estate. Now, I'm not talking about flipping houses or becoming a landlord, though those can work. I'm talking about your primary residence. Here's the thing about real estate. It's the one investment most people will make that they can use leverage on safely. You can put 20% down on a $400,000 house, and if it appreciates 3% annually, that's $12,000 in gains on your $80,000 investment. That's a 15% return on your actual money invested. Plus, you need somewhere to live anyway. Rent is just paying someone else's mortgage. When you own, you're building equity with every payment. And unlike rent, your mortgage payment is mostly fixed for 30 years while inflation erodes its real cost. But, and this is important, only buy real estate when you're financially stable enough to handle the risks. Houses need maintenance, property taxes go up, markets can decline. Don't stretch yourself thin just to become a homeowner. Final step? Step 9. This is for the high earners who've mastered everything else. Alternative investments, business ownership, maybe some speculative plays. Think cryptocurrency, individual stocks, starting a side business, angel investing. Why do these come last? Risk. These investments can lose 50%, 80%, even 100% of their value. But when you've got your emergency fund locked down, your debt eliminated, your retirement accounts maxed out, and your real estate building equity, now you can afford to take some swings. This is where you might put 5% to 10% of your net worth into higher risk, higher reward plays. Bitcoin, growth stocks, your buddy's startup. But notice, this comes after you've built a bulletproof financial foundation. Here's what most people do wrong. They start with step 9. They hear about someone making a fortune on GameStop or Dogecoin, and they think that's how wealth is built. But for every person who got rich quick, there are thousands who lost everything gambling with money they couldn't afford to lose. Real wealth building is boring. It's systematic. It's doing the same things over and over for decades, maxing out your 401k every year, living below your means, automating your investments, not checking your balance during market crashes. The average millionaire takes 28 years to reach 7 figures. 28 years. That's nearly 3 decades of consistent, boring financial habits. But here's the beautiful part. Once you get the system running, it mostly runs itself. Let me give you a real example of how this plays out over time. Sarah starts at age 25, making $50,000. She follows this exact sequence. First year, she builds her $2,000 emergency buffer. Year 2, she pays off $8,000 in credit card debt. Years 3 and 4, she builds her full 6-month emergency fund of $15,000. Year 5, she starts maxing out her company's 4% match, putting in $2,000 and getting $1,000 free. Year 6 through 8, she pays off her student loans and car loan. Year 9, she starts maxing out her 401k and IRA. By age 35, she's investing over $30,000 annually in retirement accounts alone. Now, let's fast forward. Sarah keeps this up, gets a few raises along the way, maybe switches jobs for better pay. By age 55, her investment accounts have grown to over $800,000. Not because she got lucky, not because she picked the perfect stocks, but because she followed a systematic approach for 30 years. But here's what would have happened if Sarah tried to skip steps. Let's say she started investing immediately at 25 without building her foundation. Year 3, her car breaks down. No emergency fund, so she sells $3,000 of investments at a loss to pay for repairs. Year 5, she loses her job for 3 months. Again, no safety net, so she cashes out another $8,000 in investments to survive. Every financial emergency forces her to interrupt the compounding process. Instead of steady growth, her wealth building becomes this stop-and-start nightmare. By age 55, she might have half of what she could have accumulated by building properly. This is why the order matters so much. Each step protects the next one. Your emergency fund protects your investments. Being debt-free protects your cash flow. Having a systematic approach protects you from your own impulses. Now, I want to address the biggest objection I hear. But Andy, what about inflation? What about missing out on market gains while I'm building my emergency fund? Look, I get it. When the market is ripping higher, and it feels painful to have money sitting in a 4% savings account, but wealth building isn't about optimizing every single dollar for maximum return. It's about building a system that works in all market conditions. The people who get crushed in market downturns aren't the ones with emergency funds. They're the ones who invested money they couldn't afford to lose. Remember 2008? The people who lost their homes weren't necessarily the ones with the riskiest mortgages. They were often the ones with no financial cushion when they lost their jobs. No emergency fund, no backup plan, no ability to weather the storm. The emergency fund isn't just about mathematical optimization. It's about sleeping well at night. It's about having the confidence to invest aggressively, because you know you won't need to sell during a crash. It's about having options when life gets messy. Here's another way to think about it. Wealth building is like building a house. You could skip the foundation and jump straight to framing because it's more exciting, more visible progress. But when the first storm hits, the whole thing collapses. The foundation isn't the fun part, but it's what makes everything else possible. And honestly, once you start following this system, it becomes addictive in the best possible way. There's something incredibly satisfying about checking off each step, about seeing your net worth grow month after month, about knowing you're building something lasting. The hardest part is getting started. That first $1,000 emergency fund might take you 6 months to save if money's tight. But once you build that momentum, once you prove to yourself that you can stick to a plan, everything else gets easier. One last thing, this order isn't set in stone for every single person. Maybe you've got a 401k match so generous that it makes sense to prioritize it over paying off moderate interest debt. Maybe you live somewhere with low housing costs and high rent prices where buying a house earlier makes sense. But for 95% of people, this sequence will serve you incredibly well. It's built on decades of research into behavioral psychology and financial mathematics. It accounts for human nature, market volatility, and the reality that life throws curveballs. The key is to start somewhere and keep moving forward. Don't let perfectionism paralyze you. Don't wait for the perfect time or the perfect amount of money. Start with where you are, use what you have, do what you can. So, there you have it. The correct order to build wealth with your money, from financial stability through debt elimination, emergency funding, retirement investing, real estate, and finally, alternative investments. Remember, wealth building isn't about getting rich quick. It's about building a bulletproof financial foundation that compounds over decades. If this systematic approach gave you that clarity you needed, if it helped you see exactly where to focus your energy next, please hit that subscribe button and give this a like. It really helps the channel keep running and producing this kind of deep dive content. Now, if you're ready to learn about the biggest investing mistakes that destroy wealth even when people follow the right order, you'll want to watch this video next at the top of your screen to keep the momentum going. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.